The possibility of forming an alliance between the United Kingdom, the German Empire, and the Russian Empire after 2010 was based on the fact that all these countries were monarchies, and the monarchs were cousins. They had family ties. Nicholas II and Wilhelm II were especially close, exchanging telegrams and letters before the Great War began. But what if these three cousins really united? How could it change the whole world? Let's start with the obvious. This scenario is unlikely, as there are many reasons why it could not happen. For example, Britain and Germany were engaged in a naval arms race, while Britain and Russia competed in Asia for dominance, as well as in the Mediterranean, where Germany and Russia faced issues in the Balkans due to Germany being an ally of Austria-Hungary. Britain was also on the side of France, which was Germany's rival, and an ally of Russia. Thus, for the alliance to have any chance of success, Britain needed to establish relations with France and Germany with Austria-Hungary. But Britain and Russia should also forget their centuries-old rivalry. Simply put, it would be more likely for all the Balkans to abandon their irredentist claims and unite to become the strongest country in the world than for a cousin alliance to take place. This video should not be taken seriously, but if such a giant alliance were to form, it would radically change the whole world. Now that I've explained why this is impossible, let's consider how it could have happened and how the Great War would have changed. This was supposed to happen in the year 2000 or later, when George V was crowned King of the United Kingdom and Emperor of India. In that case, family ties could have played a key role in forming these alliances. Regarding the likelihood of such a scenario, it would be quite difficult. But here is how I see it. Queen Victoria of Great Britain arranged strategic royal marriages, hoping they would ensure peace worldwide, meaning no country could undermine the British Empire, which was the largest and strongest country in the world during the Victorian era. These royal marriages were strategically important and initiated by Queen Victoria to ensure British dominance forever. Here are a few examples of how this happened. Queen Victoria's eldest daughter, Victoria, married the heir to the Persian throne, who at that time represented the largest German-speaking country, excluding Austria. This was a great risk for Britain, as Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, predicted that Prussia would be the one to unite Germany, which ultimately happened. Thus, their bet proved correct, and Wilhelm II and George V were grandsons of Queen Victoria. This was done to ensure Britain would not fall behind if Prussia somehow failed to unite Germany. Other children of Victoria also married representatives from other minor German states. Thus, the British believed that through all their marriages they ensured control over Germany. This had always been Queen Victoria's vision. And here, I want to emphasize my point of view. It must be acknowledged that Britain really needed to unite with these countries to create a cousin alliance. Otherwise, all of Queen Victoria's efforts to build alliances would be in vain. In the end, Queen Victoria had 42 grandchildren, 7 of whom became monarchs, including Wilhelm II, Nicholas II, and George V, as well as 4 queens from Norway, Spain, Greece, and Romania, which is why she is often called the grandmother of Europe. Given this, I think it is fair to say that the British should not let their royal ties fade and should try to establish an alliance with Germany and Prussia. However, the fact is that George V ascended the British throne in 1910, and by that time, it seems to me, it was already too late to form this alliance. Not only too late, but the Great War was to begin in 1914. Thus, in 4 years, it would be impossible for all these countries to effectively unite and participate in the Great War. The Great War will start too early, and Germany and Prussia have already chosen their allies, leaving Britain quite isolated. This happened because Germany had already signed a dual alliance with Austria-Hungary in 1879 and also initiated a triple alliance with Italy. Therefore, by 1910, Germany had already found new allies and had no intention of leaving them for an alliance with Britain. As for Russia, in 1894, a defensive alliance was concluded between it and France. Thus, by 1910, the Russians had already found an ally in the region and were not planning to abandon it to unite with Britain. Thus, for the cousin alliance to have a better chance of formation, we need George V to come to power much earlier. Wilhelm II became monarch in 1888 and Nicholas II in 1894. Thus, there was a 6-year difference between them. George V, as I mentioned, came to power in 1910, quite some time after his 2 cousins. Therefore, we need George V's predecessor to die much earlier, giving George more chances to form a cousin alliance. Edward VII became king after Queen Victoria in 1901 and ruled for 9 years before dying in 1910. At the beginning of his reign, the Second Anglo-Boer War was underway. Thus, some South African nationalists might decide to end his life, leading to a political crisis in Britain, and possibly resulting in a withdrawal from the war, as two of their monarchs would have died in a very short time. This is one of the ways Edward VII could have been removed in 1902 or 1903, which would subsequently have opened the way for his only surviving son, George V, to ascend the throne and become the king of the United Kingdom. In fact, this almost happened. Jean-Baptiste Cipidot was a Belgian anarchist who attempted to assassinate Prince Edward at Brussels North Station in the 1900s. Jean-Baptiste was outraged by the mass killings during World War II. As a result, he climbed into the train car before its departure and shot twice at Edward, but both times he missed. At that moment, he was only 15 years old. So how about getting active and trying to do something useful? In any case, I apologize for my passive-aggressive manner of communication. This is just one of the ways Edward X could be removed, allowing George V to inherit the throne 7 or 8 years earlier, giving him more than enough time to form a successful alliance with Germany and Prussia. For the purposes of this video, let's imagine that George V comes to power in 1903. What will happen next? He will immediately turn to Germany and Prussia, trying to establish better relations. This will bring some immediate successes, but the following year, everything will go awry. In 1904, the Japanese War will begin. Of course, one might say this will not concern the British, and they may even support Russia in this war, as they wish to unite with it, according to the narrative of the video. However, on the night of October 21st to 22nd, 1904, British-Russian relations will deteriorate due to a historical incident at Dogger Bank. The Russian fleet mistakenly identified British civilian fishing vessels as Japanese torpedo boats. In a panic, they opened fire on each other, leading to several British deaths and the sinking of a ship. The British did not take this incident lightly. Historically, Great Britain closed the Suez Canal to Russia, forcing it to go around Africa to reach the Far East and fight Japan. Perhaps under George V, seeking to establish an alliance with Russia, Britain would have tried to cover up this incident, but it would have been too risky. Perhaps the incident would not have occurred at all, as it was too trivial and mainly happened due to Russia's incompetence. I assume that Britain and Russia would have started cooperating as soon as George V came to power, which in this alternate history would have happened in 1903, a year before the Japanese War. At this time, Russia began negotiations with Japan to gain more influence in Manchuria and secure a warm port. The Japanese disapproved of this treaty, as it would limit their further expansion into China. Therefore, they decided to attack the Russian fleet in the Far East, which would force Russia to declare war. Britain could support Russia in this war and punish Japan for its actions. But there is one problem. At the beginning of 1902, the Treaty of the Japanese Alliance was signed. Britain's goal was to limit Russian expansion in Manchuria and maintain the balance of power by ensuring the territorial integrity of China and Korea. In this alternative history, shortly after signing the alliance, the British Parliament must repeal it, preferring an alliance with Russia based on the fact that George V and Nicholas II are cousins, a result of Queen Victoria's diligent work, whom many still admired. It would be claimed that Queen Victoria desired this Anglo-Russian alliance. But let me remind you that this video is extremely unrealistic. Perhaps this is my most unrealistic scenario of the year. With this clarification, I would suggest that Britain annul its treaties with Japan and slightly lean towards Russia at the beginning of the war. This would mean that Britain and Russia would communicate during the war, so that the British could warn the Russians of any Japanese warships. Thus, the incident at Dogger Bank could have been completely prevented. Russia could have passed through the Suez Canal, reached Asia, and still suffered defeat by the Japanese. After this, amidst the subsequent turmoil in Russia, I expect that Britain and Russia will remain allies based on kinship ties. This alliance could be formed around the year 1904. Thus, the Entente, signed in the same year between Britain and France, might never have seen the light of day. Perhaps the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907 would have been signed much earlier, as it historically ended the rivalry between the two countries in Central Asia, establishing spheres of influence. As for Britain and Germany, securing an alliance with the latter would be much easier and possibly more realistic. Britain's joining the Central Powers wouldn't be too crazy. It could have actually happened. But this video is not about that. The main issue between the United Kingdom and Germany was the Anglo-German naval arms race. However, upon closer examination, it turns out that the British were not concerned about it until the German Naval Law of 1908. The British public demanded that Britain build smaller warships to ensure the Germans would never catch up to them. Thus began this arms race at sea. By 1909, all of this could have changed, as Germany then had the largest and best army in the world and the second largest navy. This was, of course, extremely costly. Therefore, under the new Chancellor T. Bonhoeffer, a new approach was adopted. He began to pursue a policy of rapprochement with Britain to stop the arms race in which both countries were spending a lot of money, but neither was gaining an advantage. Germany hoped that if this could be resolved peacefully, the Germans could focus on more important issues, such as their rivalry with France. As a result, the Germans stopped producing dreadnoughts, which were a super heavy class of battleships, and mainly focused on smaller trading vessels like submarines, which, as we know, were much more successful. Thus, I assume that Anglo-German relations will significantly improve by 1909, and perhaps several more friendship treaties will be signed between the two countries. Germany remains an ally of Austria-Hungary. However, the situation may worsen after Austria's annexation of Bosnia in 1908, which angered all the great powers as it violated the Berlin Treaty and unjustifiably increased global tensions. The subsequent Bosnian crisis lasted over a year and nearly led to the outbreak of a world war, ultimately spoiling Austria's relations with Italy, Serbia, and Russia. Germany may realize the situation and try to establish closer ties with Britain and Russia as Austria-Hungary becomes increasingly burdensome. Bismarck predicted that a world war would start due to some folly in the Balkans. Therefore, many in Germany will fear that the Bosnian crisis is the beginning of a great war. In this regard, I suggest that Germany will demand Austria-Hungary to retreat. But both Britain and Russia advocate for maintaining the balance of power. Thus, Austria-Hungary will be forced to retreat, as it cannot secure the support of many other great powers, including its ally Germany, which is unwilling to start a war because of this. The double alliance will be in question, and Hungary may decide to abandon Germany, as this alliance will soon become merely formal. The Habsburgs can easily find new allies, especially in Italy and France. Historically, Italy supported Austria's annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in exchange for Austria providing certain lands in Lithuania, Tyrol, and Albania. As Austria-Hungary loses the support of other great powers, this may become their only choice, or they will be left without allies and anger all the great powers. In this scenario, I would compel Hungary to act in such a way that ensures Italy's loyalty in the future. From this moment, a union of cousins can be formed to counter the triple entente: France, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Global tension continues to rise, and war may seem inevitable by 1911 when a crisis occurs there. With the support of Britain and Spain, Germany will ensure Morocco's independence, which will be under German influence rather than French. As soon as one crisis is resolved, another will arise when Italy invades the Ottoman Empire over Libya, which will subsequently prompt the Balkan states to attack the Ottoman Empire themselves and nearly expel it from the Balkans. Of course, this scenario is highly unlikely, as I have significantly altered the balance of power. Therefore, the same events may not occur or may be substantially changed, but it is impossible to say for sure. So, I will remain true to historical events, despite all the changes. In 1913, after the Second Balkan War, the map of Europe will look almost identical, but Morocco will technically become a free nation, and Italy will expand slightly. So, these are the only differences. All great powers realize that war is on the horizon. Therefore, their alliances will be strengthened. The Ottoman Empire may join the Dante, as they will be promised the Russian Caucasus, British Arabia, and Cyprus, which will attract the Ottomans. On the other hand, the alliance of cousins will not be able to offer them anything. I think the Ottomans will likely side with France, Austria, and Hungary, but also with their former enemy, Italy. If you think this is unlikely, remember that Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire fought each other twice in 2012 and 2013, but in 2015 they became allies. It's not entirely crazy to assume that the Ottomans would join Dante under these circumstances, but I also don't see them switching sides to Russia. This defines the sides of an alternative Great War that resembles the confrontation between Northern and Southern Europe. After the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, Austria-Hungary will declare war on Serbia, which will be defended by Russia. Ultimately, all these countries will find themselves at war. I believe that the alliance of cousins will have a significant advantage not only in Europe, but also in Africa. We all agree that the alliance of cousins has great advantages in Europe, but let me tell you how the war will unfold. Italy will be skeptical of its allies as they have nothing to gain, but France may potentially promise Italy assistance after the war. possibly in acquiring Ticino from Switzerland. Italy is promised Malta and British Somalia in case of victory. Thus, the Italians will not be too involved in the war from the very beginning. As for Austria, Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, I believe Russia will act successfully against them, as historically the Russians have pushed both countries back while fighting Germany at the same time. This time, it is not so. Therefore, Dant will quickly start to lose ground. Germany's plan for victory is to first neutralize Austria and the Ottoman Empire. Then France and Italy will be left alone and forced to sign peace. Thus, Germany does not need to initiate the Schlieffen Plan.